out there in the land of YouTube. I am YouTubing, as you can see. And so I just wanted to jump on for a few minutes and say hello and see how everybody was doing. Life is full of ups and downs and highs and lows. And I guess, every time I come on here, it's a call to action. It's a call for you to join in exactly what we're doing and what the whole plan is. So if you're watching this right now, the $1,000,000 question is, what have you done to advance yourself? How much have you learned? How much have you researched? I can't. Let me see if I can get my computer. One second. One second, real quick. I'm just going to see if I can do this here. One sec. Okie dokie. I think that we're in my phone here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this to the stream. There we are. Now I can see everybody. And I will exit off the screen over here. Here it is. Okay, cool. So, there's $1,000,000 question here that I always want to ask people, and it's, what are you doing right now so that you learn more, so that you know more? I'm one man, and I guarantee you, we don't stop. That's a fact. No matter what happens, we do not stop. There's no point in stopping. We've come so far. Why would we want to go backwards? Why would we want to regress? And often when I go and I read all the comments, I see what people say to me, and I often think to myself, you must really enjoy the police state, prison state, death state. I'll see people who will write in my comments that, I was mean to the police. Well, for years and for decades that we know of, as we all gather together on social media, what we learned together is that we have been harassed and stalked, and we have become the wallet for the police department with civil asset forfeiture, criminal asset forfeiture, where if they can arrest us, they get bonuses, accolades, and promotions. We saw nothing more than that was at Western Florida. And so I can, sorry about that. I am reading chat. I can see it. I've rarely do reading chat. You're absolutely correct. Give me one second. Let me fix it. Give me 1 second. There we go. Can you guys hear me now? Give me a 5x5. Give me a 5x5 if you guys can hear me in the 1x5. How about, are we okay now? No, I don't smoke weed, my friend. I have smoked weed in my life. Can you guys hear me? Give me a 5x5. Okay, cool. Okay, cool. Is the sound all right? You guys can hear me okay? Yeah, listen, I try to stay focused on the message, and there's times when I'm not going to be perfect. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to misspeak sometimes. Sometimes I'm going to say the wrong things, and I go live all the time, and so when you go live, there is a cost to that. If you make a mistake when you're live, there's no editing that out or cutting it or retracting it. And so right now, for the 300 people who are in here, I'm live. Do me a favor, since I'm live, hit the like button. Take your finger real quick and just hit on the like button. Hit the like button. Just take your finger and just tap it right there. And I'm going to pull something out here, and I'm going to ask you guys some questions. So when we talk about Supreme Court cases and the case log, do we understand overall together that the problem that you and I have is the Supreme Court? Everybody always said, the Supreme Court said, the Supreme Court ruled, the Supreme Court held. The truth is, though, is that the Supreme Court is our problem. If you believe, let me put it the other way. If you don't believe that someone should be appointed to a position in government for life, put a one in the chat. If there should be no governor, no mayor, no assemblyman, there should be no city council member, there should be nobody who is appointed to government for life. If you agree with that, put a one in the chat. No person should be appointed to a government position. If you think about that, who's seen the movie 300? I've seen the movie 300. I've seen it 100 times. Well, 10. I've seen it 10 times. When you see the movie 300, what do you see? You look back and there's these like gods, and they're around a fire, and they're kind of melding and molting and melding and molting, and you're just like, what are these people? Those are the people who are appointed for life in government. Our biggest problem, your biggest problem, and my biggest problem is the Supreme Court. It's an unelected body appointed by oligarchs. Put a one in the chat if you're not from a family with an oligarch. I guarantee you. Dennis Sperling, this is a buddy of mine. Dennis Sperling is an attorney out of Houston, Texas, and he is a true leader. If you go to his community tab, this man down here has got a community of people that are engaged with him. That's amazing. Thank you, Dennis. I appreciate you, man. God bless you. So if you do not have if you're not from an oligarch family where you're not a billionaire or a multimillionaire, put a one in the chat. Because let me just give you one. I'm not a billionaire and I'm not a multimillionaire. But yet we keep on appointing to the Supreme Court from the oligarch class who will do the bidding for the ultra elite and the ultra rich. We know that to be a fact with Clarence Thomas. That's what we're looking at today. That's what we're looking at. You know, I really wish I was in my studio right now, but it just so happened that the timing ended up that I was here and we had a live set for 7 p.m. And then I had to eventually just go, okay, let's just shoot this thing because I don't want to leave anybody waiting. So I'm going to do a big, huge wall of history again, but I'm going to do it a little bit different this time. I'm going to show you guys, when I say, let me give you a simple example. When I say Terry versus Ohio, who do you blame for that? What do we blame currently? We blame the police for Terry versus Ohio. We blame the police for Terry stopping us. But who really did it? Who really did it? The Supreme Court did it. Earl Warren did it. A supposable liberal Supreme Court justice. Not very liberal to say the police can stop you and detain you based on their suspicion. Who signs up to be police? Who does it? People sign up to be cops. Who are they? Anybody have a family member who's a cop in their family? The guys signing up to be cops, the men and women signing up to be cops, they shouldn't be able to look at me and decide that they're reasonably suspicious of me and be able to detain me, because that jumped the shark. It left the realm of, oh, this guy's running down the road with boxes in his arm and there's an alarm going off. That would be reasonable suspicion. It got to the point now where reasonable articulable suspicion is saying, well, I saw Chille and he was out after dark and this is a high crime neighborhood. How many people have heard this is a high crime neighborhood? How many people have heard that before? This is a high crime neighborhood. This is a high crime neighborhood. Put a one in the chat if you've ever heard it. How many times have you watched police videos on YouTube or TikTok, Rick Rock, or Instagram, and the cop pulls up and he says, this is a high crime neighborhood? Well, that now equates to reasonable articulable suspicion. And who are they reasonably articulable suspicious of? You. But the point of reasonable articulable suspicion is there's supposed to be a singular articulable fact that would lead them to criminality. That you've done something criminal. Do you agree with that? Because that's not what's happening. What's happening in our country is cops are seeing people who they just don't like and saying, oh, I'm reasonably suspicious of you. How many times have I been pulled over? You guys have seen me pulled over 4 or 5 times the past couple of years, and the cops want to grab me and put their hands on me. Why do you think that you have the right to grab me and put your hands on me? The Supreme Court did that in the 1968 holding of Terry versus Ohio. That extends into MIMS. I will continue to talk about Terry versus Ohio until we get rid of it. Until one of us gets to governor power where we can at least change Terry versus Ohio in the state that we're in. You must have probable cause to engage with somebody as a policeman, as a peace officer. I don't even like the term law enforcers because they are not law enforcers. Not a single person in America signed up and has a law enforcement agreement. None of them. They all have a peace officer's agreement. So the next thing that I'm building out, where I'm building a huge graphic, is showing you how the Supreme Court over the past, I mean, you go back to the Supreme Court, back to 1896, back to 1857, you go back to the Supreme Court. You could say 1803 Marbury versus Madison, but 1803 Marbury versus Madison, that's where the Supreme Court said that the Constitution is the rule of law, that is the supreme law of the land. And so I've got some friends out there who are anarchists or volunteerists, and I've said a couple things, so I just want to kind of clear the record. We're not living by the rule of law here. We're not living under an anarchist system or a volunteer system here in America. We're living under a tyrannical police state, prison state, death state. That's an absolute fact. That's what we're living under today. A police state, prison state, death state. This is not constitutional law. This is not anarchism. This is not volunteerism. Any one of those three systems would be better than the absolute police state that we live in today. That's an absolute fact. As long as you and I, and so when you guys see me, and I'm going to segue just a little bit here, but I want to ask you a question. When you guys see me and I'm talking to a copper and I'm letting him know that he's not going to step on my rights and that I can say whatever I want and I can do whatever I want, because there is no core criminal conduct. And you're going to get this from the Model Penal Code that's going to be drafted in 1952 and finished in 1962. In every single interaction you have with a copper, there has to be a core criminal conduct. Put that in the chat, core criminal conduct. If there is no core criminal conduct, then there's no reason for you to be involving yourself with me as a peace officer. Have you heard of that before? Has anybody ever heard of, let me look at the comments real quick. Core criminal conduct. Thank you, Chuck. I appreciate it. If there's no core criminal conduct, then the police should not be hemming you up. And this is part of the defense that I'm using in the case that Las Vegas is pressing against me for filming a cop one day, him losing his ish and arresting me. And I'm not going to, you guys know me, right? I am not going to let it go. I am going to sue them till the end of time. That's a fact. I will not back down. I will not step off my rights. There's nothing anybody can say that's going to get me to step down from my constitutional rights that are ratified in the Bill of Rights in 1793. That is not going to happen. I will die standing on my rights if need be. You all can watch me die standing on my rights if need be. But what I will not do is turn to violence. What I will not do is launch some sort of revolutionary war. I am not that guy. If you were hoping I was, you're on the wrong place. I believe we change things through petition, peaceful protest. Petition, speech, peaceful protest, press. And there's just a few of the First Amendment right there. We must change this country, which brings me back to the original question I had starting this live. What have you done to educate yourself about the Supreme Court cases that have fundamentally stripped us of our constitutional rights? If you don't know them, then people contact me all the time and they say, hey, how can I help you? And I say, you can learn the cases that I know. You can learn your constitutional rights inside and out. That's how you're going to be the biggest help, because I'm going into government 100%, 100,000%, because I can win, because I'm electable, because I can raise the money, because I'm charismatic, and because I have the education to get into the government at the very highest level of a state, which would be the governorship. The governor has executive power. For example, we saw that in Florida when the governor there said, I'm not going to mandatory make people take medication. And then the hospital workers didn't have to take mandatory medication. The jail workers didn't have to take medical medication. And that's the point. We have to get one of us who's for justice, for freedom, for liberty. We have to get to the highest office in the land. Now, the presidency would be nice, but I wasn't born into a super rich family. I wasn't born into privilege. And so I believe that what I'm going to shoot for is the governorship now. Look, Grover Cleveland, he ascended into the presidency twice, lost, and won the re-election the second time. And I believe that's going to be 1896, pretty sure 18, because he wins in 1889, he wins, and then he loses after 1892, and then he wins again, I believe, in 1896. But someone can fact check that, because I'm not perfect. I'm going to make mistakes. But I believe that I can get to the government governorship, and at the governorship level, I can change things. For example, the central bank digital currency. That's a way to turn on and off your wallet if the government doesn't like what you're doing. The 2026 infrastructure bill, where they want to put a kill switch in your car and they can turn your car on and off by clicking a button. They also want to put cameras inside of your car, inside of the 2026 infrastructure bill, which when I'm governor, I'm going to say, no, you can't do it. The residents of this state do not want to be monitored by the government with a camera in their car or have a kill switch in their car. That absolutely goes against your right to travel, which a friend of mine earlier sent me a bunch of information about the right to travel. And I thought it was just brilliant what they had written down. And it's going to be Kent versus Dulles, Kent versus Dulles. And that case, I believe, is going to be 1958. And in the 1958 case of Kent versus Dulles, it says that you do not have to get a license to drive. You guys can break down the whole case. It's on oyez.org, oyez.org. So you can put Kent versus Dulles, oyez.org. As a matter of fact, let me pull it up and show it to you guys so you guys can see it. It's here. Sorry about that. Claudette said something over here. What's going on? That's right. The reason I go at the cops is because it takes a man to enforce the tyrannical laws that are being pushed upon us. It takes a man to do that. A human being has to be willing to do that to another person. I am unwilling to do that to another person. I would not treat any of you guys the way the police in this country treat people. And this goes back. I'm going to educate you now. I'm going to give you a case, and then I'm going to show you one more case so that together we can learn our Supreme Court cases where the Supreme Court consistently rules against us. In this one particular case, we did get a little liberty in Kent versus Dulles. Let me read this bad chicken to you. So this is Kent versus Dulles right over here. Let me see what you guys can see. In Kent versus Dulles in 1958, was I right? I was right. It was 58. Great. My years, I get a little jumbled. And again, this is going to be from the Warren Court, which means Earl Warren, if you're unfamiliar. And Rockwell Kent applied for and was refused a passport to visit England. In addition to informing him that his application refusal rested on his Communist Party's affiliations, the passport director told Kent that in order for a passport to be issued, a hearing would be necessary. The director instructed Kent to submit an affidavit as to whether he was a current or past communist. Upon the advice of counsel, Kent refused to sign the affidavit, but did participate in a hearing at which he was asked more than once to sign an affidavit concerning his communist affiliations. When he refused the affidavit, the passport company advised Kent that no further action would be taken on his passport request until he satisfied the affidavit requirement. On appeal from consecutive adverse rulings in both district and appellate court, the Supreme Court granted Kent certiorari, meaning that his case could be heard at the Supreme Court. And so now every time you hear about a Supreme Court case, thank you, Mr. Waldo Baldo, I just saw that. Thank you, sir. Every time you read about a Supreme Court case, I want to teach you guys something that you may not have known yesterday. The Supreme Court does not rule. That's not what the Supreme Court does. The Supreme Court holds to be constitutional, or it is not held to be constitutional. It's either struck down or it's upheld to be constitutional. A simple example of that would be that the legislature in Kansas creates a law that says you can't interrupt an assemblyman during a conference because that would be against the law. And they put it through the legislature, it passes, and it's signed by the governor, or if it's an ordinance, by the mayor. And so now once it's signed into law, then the Supreme Court, someone sues and says, hey, they said that I couldn't interrupt an assemblyman in conference, and I disagree with that because I do have the right to speech. It goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court would strike down that law in Kansas that makes it so that you can't speak, because that's unconstitutional. You're born with the liberty of speech. You're born with the right to speak. Now, if they said that you were allowed to speak, and that was the law, I'm just giving a silly example so it's easy to understand. If they said that you were allowed to speak when anybody else speaks, then the Supreme Court would uphold or hold the constitutional to be constitutional. So now here, the constitutional question, every time you look at something, could the Executive Passport Department defer or refuse the issuance of passports to individuals suspected of being communists or traveling abroad to further communist causes? And this was a 5-4 decision. And the cool part about Oyez, I'm not sure if you can see that up here, you can click by ideology. So the 1, 2, 3, 4 conservatives voted against it. And the 1, 2, 3, 4 and a half so-called liberals voted for it. But at the Supreme Court level, they're both on the same side. In a 5-4 decision, the court held that the right to travel is an inherent element of liberty that cannot be denied to American citizens. So this would also apply to the BS driver's license scam that's done upon all of us. Although the executive may regulate the travel practices of citizens by requiring them to obtain valid passports, it may condition the fulfillment of such requirements with the imposition of the rules that abridge basic constitutional notions of liberty, assembly, association, and personal autonomy. So in this particular case, the Supreme Court got it right. However, a lot of the times, most of the times, when we talk about losing our rights, it comes from the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's the one who strips away our liberties because you have a bunch of people appointed for life. And you have to understand what the problem is. It's the Supreme Court, scholar. That's what it is. As you get into your scholarly studies, it's the Supreme Court that's working against you and working against me in a regular fashion. And even this one, the right for you, in Kent versus Dole's, if we had lost that right, if we had lost the right in Kent versus Dole's to be able to get a passport and be able to travel freely abroad, then we would have a locked-in police state in the United States of America. You wouldn't be able to leave the country from a 1958 case called Kent versus Dole's. You would be locked here. If the government, because once they take an inch, they take a mile. Once they take a single solitary bit of rights from us, look what's going on after the flu of 2020. Now there's no more government services. You can't go to a lot of government places. They want to change out the currency to a central banking digital currency because had they had central banking digital currency in 2020 and had they had a kill switch in your car in 2020, they would have mandatorily made you take a medication. And if you didn't, they would have turned off your wallet and turned off your car. That's the dangers of allowing a federal government to have too much power. And this is the reason that we have the Second Amendment. So now I'm going to show you another case here. Heien. North Carolina was a decision by the United States Supreme Court. Let me see what you guys can see. Sorry about that. So this is going to be Heien versus North Carolina. North Carolina was a decision by the United States Supreme Court ruling that a police officer's reasonable mistake of the law can provide the individual suspicion required by the... See, but it's a lie. There is no... Even this is a lie. It's just a lie. The way they word this is untrue. The Fourth Amendment, just so you know, so it's a decision by the Supreme Court holding the police officer's reasonable mistake of the law can provide individualized suspicion required by the Fourth Amendment. That's not true. The Fourth Amendment requires probable cause, not reasonable suspicion. So where does this reasonableized suspicion come in? Make a reasonable mistake, provide an individualized suspicion. That comes from Terry versus Ohio. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's what I'm trying to explain to you. So this is a case in 2014. And I wanted to go over these oral arguments and I want to listen to them. If you guys are down, and that's cool, I want people to listen to this. Now listen to the facts of the case. Let me make sure you guys can see it clear. Now let's take a look at the facts of this case, and this is important. On April 29th, 2010, Sergeant Darius of the Surrey County Sheriff's Department observed Manuel Javier Vasquez driving north on 177 with a broken taillight. When Darius pulled over the vehicle, he noticed another man, Nicholas Heine, lying under a blanket in the back seat. Darius spoke with the two men, felt that their stories did not match up. Okay, so what did we learn right here? Do you see this? Darius spoke with the two men and found that their stories did not match up. What the police will do when they pull you and a friend over is they will separate you and they'll ask you questions. This is why you say, I don't answer questions. Because if they separate you and you say, oh, we were just heading to Tulsa, oh, we were just going to stop over here at in Anytown, and you have two different stories because you were going to stop at Anytown and go to that burger and get that burger before you kept on going on to Tulsa, because to get to Tulsa is going to take you 7 hours, but to get to Anytown is going to take you 4 hours. And so you planned your meal that you were going to stop in Anytown. But then when you get pulled over by the cop, he separates you. You start answering questions. Your friend says, oh, we're just heading to Tulsa. The other guy says, oh, we're just going to Anytown to get a burger. Now the cop has heard two different stories. This is why you don't answer questions to the police, especially if they separate you from your friend. They'll pull you apart because you'll get someone like myself who will tell the cop, go have a ham sandwich, go pound sand. And sometimes I'm a little bit meaner than that. Sometimes I'm a little bit more harsh than that. And they'll say, oh, your friend over here is having a hard time. What's up with him? What's his deal? At that point, you say, I'm not going to be answering any questions. He says, oh, just tell me where you guys are heading. Listen to me. I invoke my Fifth Amendment right. I am not going to be answering any questions. If you answer questions to the copper, you're setting your friend up and yourself up for a wild ride. And listen to what we're hearing here. Darius spoke with the two men, felt that their stories didn't match up, and was concerned that Heen had not gotten up from the back seat. Darius asked for permission to search the vehicle. Heen agreed, and Darius found a bag containing 54.2 grams of cocaine in the car. A grand jury indicted Heen for 2 counts of trafficking cocaine. Heen filed a motion to suppress the evidence discovered during the search of his vehicle, and the trial court denied the motion. The North Carolina Court of Appeals reversed the trial court and held that the traffic stop was objectively reasonable because North Carolina law only requires one working taillight. The North Carolina Supreme Court reversed and held that when an officer's mistake of the law is reasonable, it may give rise to the reasonable suspicion from Terry versus Ohio required for a traffic stop of a vehicle under the Fourth Amendment. So this is they're just so you know, when they changed Terry versus Ohio, now they say the Fourth Amendment standard is reasonable suspicion. The Fourth Amendment standard is not reasonable suspicion. But now they're writing it in all of these holdings. This case is, guess what, based off of Terry versus Ohio. Terry versus Ohio changed your Fourth Amendment. It may give rise to the reasonable suspicion required for a traffic stop of the vehicle under the Fourth Amendment. That is a bald-faced, absolute lie. That is not what the Fourth Amendment says. Not today, not yesterday. Go back to 1793. The Fourth Amendment says that no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation. The North Carolina Supreme Court sent the case back to the state of Court of Appeals. The North Carolina Court of Appeals found no error in the trial court's judgment. A dissenting judge, however, stated that the North Carolina Supreme Court ruling created fundamental unfairness because it held citizens to the traditional rule that ignorance of the law is no excuse. While allowing police to be ignorant of the law based on his dissent, Heen again applied to the North Carolina Supreme Court, which rejected his appeal. And then it got all the way up to the Supreme Court. So once the North Carolina Supreme Court rejected Heen's appeal, he then applied for certiorari, which is the right to have the case heard by the appointed oligarch's favorite people. And then here's the constitutional question of whether or not something is constitutionally viable or not. Does a police officer's mistake of the law provide individualized reasonable suspicion that the Fourth Amendment requires to justify a traffic stop? Once again, the constitutional question is put into a paradigm of Terry versus Ohio. Put a 1 in the chat if you know that. Put a 1 in the chat if you know right now that the Fourth Amendment never says reasonable suspicion. It's God blessed infuriating. It makes me so freaking angry. That is not what the Fourth Amendment says. The Fourth Amendment never, ever mentions the term reasonable suspicion. It was created in 1968, and now you'll see it in hundreds of Supreme Court cases where it's reasonably suspicious of you. Well, let me tell you something. I'm sitting in a parking lot. I was running out of time. I needed to talk to my people. So now I'm in a car and I'm talking to my computer. Well, you know what? We're reasonably suspicious that he's crazy. We're reasonably suspicious that he's communicating with other people to rob this building I'm in front of. We're reasonably suspicious that he has guns in his car. Reasonable suspicion is not a part of the Fourth Amendment. That is a bald-faced freaking lie. It is so infuriating to read that. It is so infuriating. Let me just pop it in right here to ChatGPT. Please list the Fourth Amendment of the United States. There it is. And let me show you exactly what I'm looking at. Let me show you exactly what I'm looking at on ChatGPT so that you guys can see exactly what I'm seeing right here. Let's finish this and I'll come back to the Fourth Amendment. How about that? That way you guys can stay on the track here. So here's the constitutional question in Heen versus North Carolina, 2014. Does a police officer's mistake of the law provide the individualized reasonable suspicion that Terry versus Ohio requires to justify a stop? Conclusion, 8-1. The only dissenting Supreme Court appointed by the oligarch personnel is Sotomayor. Bader Ginsburg voted for it. She's great, right? Scalia voted for it. He's great, right? Current Supreme Court Chief Justice, he's great, right? Stephen Breyer, Kennedy, these are liberals, right? Clarence Thomas, surely a staunch conservative, is going to say the Fourth Amendment does not say that it's reasonably suspicious. It says probable cause. Nope, they all vote for it. So the question is, does a police officer's mistake of the law provide individual reasonable suspicion that the Fourth Amendment required to justify a traffic stop? Yes. Yes, a cop can make a mistake. Chief Justice Roberts delivered the opinion in an 8-1 majority. The court held that the search and seizure is reasonable under the Fourth Amendment when an officer has made a reasonable factual or legal mistake. Oh, really? Oh, really? Isn't that funny? Because for you and I, ignorance of the law is no excuse. But for the coppers, it's perfectly fine. Copper made a mistake. Arrest his ass. The cop made a mistake, but they found contraband in his car, so now he has to go to jail. Even though he wasn't using the contraband, he wasn't smoking the contraband, he wasn't using those drugs, he wasn't on drugs, he just had them, and we've criminalized drugs, unless, of course, you have oligarchy money, and then you get your drugs from the pharmaceuticals. Unless, of course, you're Hunter Biden, you can have a gun and drugs and evade your taxes, and it's perfectly fine because you're the president's son, so you're just going to get a misdemeanor. You know, when I was arrested in 2002, I had this much of a substance that I used for bodybuilding. This much of a substance. This much of a substance. They charged me with 5 felonies. You created me. You guys who arrested me and charged me and persecuted and prosecuted me, and I beat those charges, you created the monster that I am today that will change this BS system. I guarantee you, we don't stop. Type it. We don't stop. The Fourth Amendment standard is that no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation of the victim. It does not say that any old jackboot thug pig can say, I'm suspicious of you. That is not what the Fourth Amendment standard says at all whatsoever. It's not even remotely close. The seizure is reasonable under the Fourth Amendment when an officer has made a reasonable or legal mistake. Because Fourth Amendment jurisprudence turns on the question of reasonableness, governing officials have traditionally been allowed leeway to enforce the laws for the community's protection. Do you feel like it's for the community protection? Because the prison industry is just crazy. As long as the mistake of fact or law in question was reasonable, the Fourth Amendment does not hold such mistakes to be incompatible with the concept of reasonable suspicion. However, the court also held that those mistakes must be objectively reasonable. An officer cannot gain the benefit of Fourth Amendment reasonableness through a sloppy, incomplete knowledge of the law. So is that how it's going? Or are they screwing us? Is that how it's going? Is that how it's going? Is it not a sloppy, ridiculous, their form of what reasonable is? Like I just said, I'm sitting in a parking lot right now. They could reasonably suspect that really I'm planning on robbing this place because you're in a high crime area and the sun's going down, Chille. Put your hands behind your back. Get on your knees. Get on your knees. I've decided in my little pea brain that I'm reasonably suspicious of you. You will get on your knees. Drop down and get on your knees. And that's what they say. Get on your knees. How many people have been told to get on their knees? How many people have been in the torture cuffs? Oh, Americana's in here. I do have money for your fundraiser. Eric said, know that I appreciate you more than air. I truly love you and consider you part of my family. This is Eric's whose fundraiser. Um, Eric, I have at least $100 in donations coming in for your wheelchair right now. People who have Venmoed me, Cash App me, PayPal me. So Eric, we have at least. You're the greatest person I've ever known. Man, that's I appreciate it, but I'm just one man doing the best that I can. I'm doing one. I'm just. God bless you, Eric. I just didn't want your your comment to go by because Eric, as you know, 2 years ago was told that he would die within a couple months, and he told them, "I'm not dying," and he's still kicking. And we're doing a fundraiser to raise the money for his wheelchair. So that's another thing. But I have at least $100 from Dan and from two super chats I missed on the last one. I have two super chats coming in from the last live we did for you, Eric. So I counted all the PayPal, Venmo, and Cash App, but I didn't count that super chat money. So okay, now let me get back to Heen, and I'm going to come back to you in 1 second, Eric. So an officer can gain, and this is so now here's what Roberts wrote. However, the court also held that those mistakes must be objectively reasonable. An officer cannot gain the benefit of Fourth Amendment reasonableness through a sloppy or incomplete knowledge of the law. Is that not what's exactly happening, though? Isn't he? I mean, John Roberts wrote in the opinion exactly what is happening. They're using sloppy, incomplete knowledge of the law and saying they're suspicious of you. We just saw that with Pink Camera Magic, and that the depositions of those two coppers that's gone viral, 1 million views, 2 million views on my channel alone, and that's Pink Camera Magic. Make sure you guys get over to her channel and subscribe. So then, and now here's where they're going to chime in the liberals with the conservative. Oh, so Justice Elena Kagan. Well, let me just tell you about Elena Kagan. Raised up on the Upper East Side in New York, super rich, went to the best school ever, super rich, went to the best college ever, super rich, went to the best law school ever, super rich. This woman is an oligarch's dream. She just puts the liberal tag on herself, and then she can write BS like this that strips away your rights and my rights. In her concurring opinion, in other words, agreeing opinion, Kagan emphasized that the majority opinion's analysis was limited to when the mistake of the law in question is an objective, reasonable one. Justice Kagan wrote that the test to determine whether an officer made an objectively reasonable mistake is more stringent than one to determine whether a government official is entitled to qualified immunity. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, racist, joined in the concurring opinion. Justice Sonia Mayor wrote a dissenting opinion in which she argued that the Fourth Amendment jurisprudence has traditionally focused on the actual factual conclusions rather than his understanding of the law. Expanding leeway allowed to police officers with respect to their factual assessments of the meaning of the laws they are meant to enforce runs the risk of eroding the Fourth Amendment's protections. In the absence of any evidence that holding police officers to this standard would prevent effective law enforcement of the law, mistakes of the law should not be considered reasonable under the Fourth Amendment. So that's Heen versus North Carolina. That is Heen versus North Carolina. And now I'm going to lose the light here. So let me just read to you the Fourth Amendment. So you heard how it's reasonable for them to make mistakes. Reasonable. What exactly is reasonable? And this was right here. Let me pull this up for you guys so you guys can see it. Let me see what you guys can see. Okay, cool. Thanks a lot for the super chat. I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. You're welcome. You're welcome. So this says the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution protects citizens' rights from unreasonable searches and seizures. It states the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the person or things to be seized. This amendment emphasizes the importance of privacy and sets forth the conditions under which search warrants can be issued, requiring probable cause and a specific description of the place to be searched and the items to be seized. It serves as a crucial safeguard for individual rights and serves to balance law enforcement activities with the protections of personal property. Would you take a look at that, folks? The Supreme Court case in the United States established the reasonable suspicion in the landmark case of Terry versus Ohio. In this case, the court held that law enforcement officers may conduct a limited search known as a Terry stop if they have reasonable suspicion that the person is involved in criminal activity and poses a potential threat to the safety of the officers or others around. Reasonable suspicion is a lower standard than probable cause, which is required for a full search or arrest. Is that what's happening, though? No. It allows law enforcement to briefly detain and question individuals based on specific articulable facts that would lead a reasonable person to suspect that criminal activity is occurring. Since Terry versus Ohio, the concept of reasonable suspicion has been further refined and applied in various court decisions, shaping the legal landscape for law enforcement practices related to stops and searches. It provides balance between... No, it does not. You're such a liar, ChatGPT. Okay. How many cases use Terry versus Ohio as the jurisprudence? Oh, I misspelled it. List all the cases that use reasonable suspicion, Terry standard, for their holding. Providing an exhaustive list of all the cases that have utilized reasonable suspicion standard derived from Terry versus Ohio would be impractical due to the vast number of cases that have relied on this standard over the years. However, I can provide you with a selection of significant cases that have applied to Terry standard in various contexts. United States versus Sokolow. The Supreme Court held that the DEA agents had reasonable suspicions to conduct and subsequent search based on the defendant's behavior and travel patterns. So now your behavior and your travel patterns. Illinois versus Wardlow. The Supreme Court ruled the individual's unprovoked flight from the presence of police officers in a high crime area created reasonable suspicion justifying a Terry stop. Hibble versus 6th Judicial District Court of Nevada, 2004. The Supreme Court upheld that the constitutionality of requiring an individual to disclose their name during a Terry stop as long as the requirement did not violate the individual's Fifth Amendment right. Florida versus JL, 2000. The Supreme Court held that an anonymous tip lacking indica of reliability standing alone did not provide reasonable suspicion for a Terry stop. United States versus Arzivu. The Supreme Court ruled that law enforcement officers may consider a totality of the circumstances, including innocent factors, to establish reasonable suspicion for a Terry stop. We could go on and on and on. Terry versus Ohio has created, it's abused coming from an ex-cop, but that's how we were trained. Looking back, I regret it all. Well, Mr. Seaborn, thank you for your commentary. I really appreciate it. And I'm turning a corner myself as I become more, I'm trying my best to see people as individuals, and I'm doing my best to be more loving and more accepting, because we have to change the system. But you can't send a weeping willow to Washington. So Terry versus Ohio has ruined our country. So listen, tomorrow night we do a fundraiser for Eric. Tomorrow night, I'm going to ask you to pull your wallet out. I'm not asking for a lot of money. I'm asking for 5, 10, 15, 20 bucks. I got at least $100 sitting from Dan on my PayPal, from Chevy. I didn't read any names yet. I'm sorry. When I got in here, I was so rushed to get to the live. I didn't want to leave you guys waiting. We had set a live for 7. So thank you for your comment, but we have to fight back against Terry versus Ohio. Did you read what ChatGPT said? The vast number of cases based on reasonable suspicion. And now in Oyez, they say the reasonable suspicion is the standard of the Fourth Amendment. No, it's not. No, it's not. It is not. There's no such thing as reasonable suspicion. Let me show you just one more thing. There it is right there. There it is right there. I want to show this to you. So I just want you guys to see it. It's right here. I just want you guys to see it. I mean, you guys could just show me. Just let me know where you see that reasonable suspicion is in there. Here are some images of the Fourth Amendment right here. The Fourth Amendment, the right of the people to be secure in their person, houses, and papers and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the person or things to be seized. Where does that say reasonable suspicion? I don't see it. What about this one here? The right of the people. The right of the people to be secure. Come on. Show me that bad chicken. Pull it up. Let me take a look at that bad chicken. The right of the people to be secure in their person, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. You're going to see it time and time and time again. You'll see it continually, time and time and time again, that the Fourth Amendment is based on probable cause, not reasonable suspicion. The Fourth Amendment is based on probable cause where you have broken the law, not on some guy who went to an academy for 2 weeks and learn OTJ on the job over the next year, and then he can say he's reasonably suspicious of you, and the guy who's doing it doesn't have to have any knowledge of the law. According to Heen versus North Carolina, 2014, he can mistakenly say he had reasonable suspicion, investigate you, find reasonable suspicion, and then put you in torture cuffs and detain you. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. So listen, to the people who donated Eric's wheelchairs tomorrow night. Tomorrow night we do Eric's wheelchair, same bat time, same bat channel. We only got a couple grand left to go on his thing. So tomorrow I'm going to ask you to pull out your wallet. Check my channel for when the live is going to broadcast. I'm going to look with Colin over at Delete Lawz Clips. We'll figure out the best time to go live tomorrow. I want to get the rest of Eric's money raised for his wheelchair. That's in my heart and in my soul, and we got to get it done. All right, I'm going to get the flock out of here. Thanks, you guys, for coming to my TED Talk. I appreciate it. What are you doing to educate yourself about the Supreme Court laws that have stripped away your fundamental liberties? What are you doing to learn about it? How many case laws on my trifold, on my ebook, on my poster do you know and have memorized? I've got hundreds of cases in my head memorized, so many that sometimes I can mistake one case for another. I mean, there's so many cases in my head. What are you doing to learn? You know, look, I have this trifold. Now, this is one of the older ones. I always keep a trifold in my car, always. And I gave away my last couple trifolds to people who've been pulled over. If you don't have every single case on my trifold memorized, why don't you? How come you don't? How come you don't? I don't understand. You should know every single case there is, Supreme Court law, because the Supreme Court's our biggest problem. Our biggest problem is the Supreme Court. All right, I got to get the flock out of here. Thanks for coming, guys. I'll see you on the next one. Later, Gators.